So we're in this series of studies that we've entitled Winning at Relationships. And in this series, we're actually learning that there are five bonds that hold every relationship together, connection points in every relationship. And one of those five bonds is the one of reliance, where do you have somebody that you can rely on, somebody that will be there for you in the midst of just struggle, maybe in the midst of joy, but whenever you actually need them. And the idea of rely or reliance is this. It's the measure of how much the other person meets my needs and how much I meet their needs. And so it's this interdependent thing where I meet their needs, they meet my needs, and a healthy relationship is a balance between my meeting their needs, their meeting my needs, and what you bring to the table to the relationship and what they bring to the table in your relationship. And so today we're actually going to dig deeper into this bond of reliance. And reliance, again, has to do with the needs that you are meeting in the other person's life, the needs that they are meeting in your life, and maybe it's needs for companionship. And you find yourself lonely and they're there and they're willing to be your companion. You go, man, I love that. Don't like going to the movies alone. Don't like eating alone. I love having a companion in my relationship. Or maybe it's affection and they give you affection. Maybe it's affirmation and you appreciate the way that they talk to you. Nobody's talked to you that way before. And they're very affirming of who you are and praise you and what you're doing. Maybe it's financial as you look at it, but you begin to develop this sense of reliance on this other person and you're enjoying the relationship. And sometimes it's easier to talk about reliance in the negative. Not in what you do to build reliance, but maybe what it looks like when you don't have a relationship where there's reliance or reliability in that relationship. Maybe it's easier to talk about what happens when somebody lets you down. Because my guess is we all know what it feels like when somebody lets us down, doesn't come through for us. We thought we could rely on somebody and they didn't show up. It's when you share information with a close friend. Maybe it's a fact, maybe it's a feeling about your life, maybe it's a thought or an opinion, and you share that piece of information with them in confidence. You don't expect anybody else to hear it. Never imagine that they're going to repeat it to anybody else, but then all of a sudden they do. And you look at that relationship and you are so mad and you're so disappointed in that person. And you say, why did you do that? I trusted you, therefore I relied on you and you didn't come through for me. And you disappointed me. Or perhaps for you, it's maybe you're working on a project with a coworker at work and you work hard together on that project, but then when it's done, they take all the credit for that particular project, never acknowledge your help with it. Or maybe it's when your spouse said, look, I'll take care of paying the bills. I'll make sure all of that is done. And then they consistently drop the ball. Or perhaps it's when your mom or your dad never showed up to sporting events, never showed up to any school events in your life, and they were important to you, and you said, man, I'm trusting my mom, trusting my dad that they're going to show up. I'm going to rely on them to do that, and then they don't, and all of a sudden the dial of reliance begins to drop. Or maybe you're an employer and you give an employee a project to do at work. They fail to do it by the time the deadline comes around, and some of these you look at and you say, you know, that's just small. No big deal. Just missed one baseball game, just missed one football game, just missed one deadline at work. And yet when they begin to pile up, all of a sudden it makes us feel, the person that's been left standing short, it makes us feel overlooked, it makes us feel unseen, unheard, unimportant, sometimes even disrespected. And then reliance goes down. And as reliance goes down, all of a sudden we say, you know what, I never should have trusted them. I should have known. I should have known better. I guess I didn't know them as well as I thought that I did. And all of a sudden the dials begin to drop in that relationship. It's been said that a reliable person, somebody that's good at relying, cares. And so the whole acronym for CARE is this. CARE is they're consistent. They're going to show up on a regular basis. You know that you can count on them every time. Not only are they consistent, they're available. They're around when you need them. And this is an interesting one because sometimes somebody is not available all that much, and it doesn't mean they're a bad person. Doesn't mean that they're somebody you shouldn't associate with, but it may tell you something about how you rank as far as priority in that relationship. I mean, if they're not always available to you, what it means is you're not a top priority. There are other things that are above you on their priority list. And so it may give you an indication of where you are in that relationship. Beyond consistent, available, responsive is the R. And the idea of responsive is this: they'll take action. They don't just listen to you, but they'll actually take action to help you in that situation. And the final one is just engaged. The idea of being engaged is they know you. They're engaged enough in your life that they know what you're going through so that they can provide care, so that you can rely on them on a consistent basis to be responding to whatever is going on in your life. And so you need to understand, God's design has always been that we would rely on one another. God's design has always been that we would meet each other's needs. And here's what you need to understand about knowledge and trust and reliance, and it's this. The amount that you know about a person, what you trust them with, sets the ceiling for how much you can rely on another person. And so know and trust have a direct impact on the whole idea of reliance. And so you got to know the person to make sure that you're trusting them and relying on things that they are even capable of doing or performing in your life. And here's the thing. If you neglect to meet somebody's needs, because again, reliance is all about meeting somebody's needs. If you neglect to meet their needs, they neglect to meet your needs, you need to understand, as reliance goes down, so does trust. And as trust goes down, so does knowledge, because they'll say, you know what, I thought I knew you well enough. I thought I knew that I could trust you to come through with that particular thing. I thought I knew you well, but obviously I didn't. I don't trust you anymore, and reliance goes down. And so you begin to mess up in the area of reliance, and it begins to affect everything in that relationship. And it impacts them both, impacts all three. And all of a sudden, because reliance has gone down, because trust has gone down, because knowledge has gone down, it pushes us to two extremes. And one of the extremes is this. The first extreme is just being too independent, where you go, I'm not going to rely on anybody. Maybe you've gotten burned in your life before. Maybe you've gotten hurt in your life before. You say, I'm not going to trust anybody whatsoever. So that's the first extreme. Second extreme is to become too dependent, where you become so dependent on the other person that you lose your identity in the whole process. And for some of us, from the time you were born, you were taught the only person you can depend on is yourself. And so be independent, be an island, take care of yourself. Or for other people, you just kind of say, you know what, be careful, otherwise you're going to look too needy. You're going to look like you're desperate, you're needy, and on the surface, being independent, being self-sufficient, being resilient, independent, it sounds great, but the problem is, all of a sudden, you find yourself alone, and that's not how you were designed to live life. The other extreme is becoming so dependent that you stop relying on God to take care of things, and you rely on somebody else. And as you rely on somebody else, you make them God in your life, and there's nobody that can live up to that. And you're going to find yourself getting hurt and burned. And what impacts our ability to rely are just life experiences. There are things that happen to you in life, things that you know about life, good or bad. Things that have happened to you where you say, I either trust a lot so that I can rely a lot, or you'd say, man, I've learned not to trust anybody, therefore I won't rely on anybody. But it's your life experiences, the things that you've gone through in life that begin to dictate your ability to rely on others. And I like what Judith Segal said. She's the author of a book that's entitled What Children Learn from Their Parents' Marriage. And in her book, she talks about the importance of just being interdependent. In her book, she really says the same things that Paul said in 1 Corinthians chapter 12, where he says we are dependent on one another and we are interdependent with one another. And she says it's actually that interdependency that makes relationships strong. And so she was talking about marriages, but this is what she said. In marriage, where partners do not offer mutual support, partners have become disappointed in each other and have come to believe that they must look out for themselves first. And she says, when that happens, the relationship begins to break down because I can't trust you anymore. And so I need to start taking care of myself, looking out for myself instead of you looking out for me. And all of a sudden, the relationship begins to fall apart. And she goes on, she actually just makes this statement. She says, mutual dependency is a trademark of a healthy relationship. If you want your relationship to be healthy, you've got to know each other, you've got to trust each other, and you've got to rely. I meet your needs, you meet my needs. We are interdependent with each other, which is exactly what God said thousands of years ago. Exactly what Paul wrote in 1 Corinthians chapter 12. He says, we're like bodies, and the human body needs all of the parts in order to be strong. So here's my challenge for each of us this week. One is begin to move the dial of rely. begin to move the dial of reliance where you can begin to rely on another person, where you can meet their needs, they can meet your needs. But to do that, it's going to require several things. And the first thing, it's going to mean that you need to work on the area of knowledge. And move the area of knowledge, you've got to spend time talking, you've got to have lots of together time, you've got to take lots of time. And so you begin to move the dial of knowledge, which then begins to move the dial of trust. And maybe you're a very trusting person. Maybe you need to move it down a little bit. Maybe you're more of a skeptic. You need to move it up. But you begin to move the dial of trust, which then begins to affect and impact your ability to rely, because it's that interdependence, again, that makes every relationship work. And so the first thing you do is begin to communicate with one another. Make sure that you've got lots and lots of opportunity to talk. The second thing that I would challenge you is begin to put the other person first. If you're not doing that, put the other person first. We talked about this a couple of weeks ago. Book of Philippians actually says this. It says, don't look out only for your own interest in your relationships, but take interest in others as well. And so begin to talk with each other, but put the other person first. Find out what their needs are, what's going on in their life. Not just making sure that your needs are met, but put them first and begin to meet their needs. And so begin to communicate, put the other person first. And the other thing is, don't do all of this alone. You can't do it alone. God says he will be with you. God says he will guide you. We talked about this the first week as well. Philippians chapter 2 says, for God is working in you, giving the desire and the power to do what pleases him. In other words, God is going to give you the desire to say, let's get this one right. Let's make sure that knowledge is building. Let's make sure that trust is building. Let's make sure that reliance is where it needs to be. And God says, you don't have to do this alone. I'll be there with you. I will not only give you the desire, I'll give you the power to make sure that the dials are set where they need to be set, that your life is going in the direction that it needs to go. And again, whether we're talking about a friendship, whether we're talking about a dating relationship, whether we're talking about a marriage, somebody who loves you, somebody who wants to support you, they're going to challenge you. But if you have the relationship right, you're still going to be able to rely on one another. You're going to meet their needs. They're going to begin to meet your needs. And they're going to be your greatest cheerleader.